Room 304 housed a woman who hadn't spoken in 3 years. Advanced dementia, the doctors said. Her family visited less frequently. What's the point of visiting someone who doesn't recognize you anymore? The hippocampus creates and retrieves memories. In dementia, it deteriorates like a library, where index cards scattered. But there's another structure, the amygdala. This never forgets. It preserves traumatic memories with perfect fidelity. Fear, terror, shock, encoded so deeply they bypass conscious recall. For 50 years, something had been locked in this woman's amygdala. Something so overwhelming her brain built walls around it. Dementia, paradoxically, sometimes breaks these walls down. That Tuesday afternoon, as autumn sun cast long shadows, something stirred. Her hands began to tremble. "The river," she whispered. First words in 3 years. The river was so cold that night. The nurse stood frozen, but her tone was different, not confused. Terrifyingly clear, terrifyingly certain. "I need to tell someone what I saw," the grandmother continued, voice gaining strength. "Before I forget again, what she saw, not what happened to her. What she saw. Dissociative amnesia, the brain's emergency response to unbearable trauma, not gradual deterioration. Sudden, complete erasure of specific memories. The person functions normally otherwise. They just can't access certain truths. For 50 years, her brain had hidden something. Now, as dementia stripped protective structures, truth was emerging like a body rising from deep water. "There were 3 of them," she said, staring at trembling hands. "I watched from the window." The nurse knelt beside her. "What did you see?" Expression of such profound horror that the nurse stepped back. "I saw who did it," she whispered, "and I never told anyone." The brain processes trauma differently, not as narrative, but as sensory fragments, images, sounds, physical sensations disconnected from timeline. Cold glass against her palm. That's what she remembered first. Her breath fogging the window, wiping it clear to keep seeing. Then sound. Men's voices, harsh and urgent. Then a splash. Heavy splash, like something pushed or thrown. Then silence. Complete silence. Even crickets stopped. Her baby slept behind her. She thought, if I scream, they'll know someone saw. They'll come. They'll find my baby. So she did nothing. Watched 3 figures walk away, disappear into trees. Stood at that window until dawn, paralyzed. Morning came. She fed her baby, started breakfast. Her husband asked, "Did you sleep well?" She opened her mouth to tell him. Nothing came out. Words weren't there. The entire night had been erased. She felt terrible heaviness, dread, but couldn't access why. Dissociative amnesia's terrible mercy. The brain protects by making you forget. But trauma doesn't disappear, it just becomes invisible. Within hours, police arrived. Cold case files pulled from archives. In 1974, a man disappeared from her community, presumed to have left voluntarily. No body found, no suspects. Case went cold. Until now. She pointed to a map with startling precision. The bend near the old mill. Her descriptions were specific, detailed, preserved in her amygdala with perfect clarity despite 5 decades. "Why didn't you tell anyone at the time?" the detective asked. "Because one of them was my husband's brother. Another was the local deputy sheriff. Who would have believed me? A young woman accusing her brother-in-law and law enforcement. They would have called me hysterical. Or worse, witness suppression. Not all silence comes from inability to remember. Some comes from inability to speak safely. In 1970s rural communities, power structures were rigid. Women's testimony against connected men would have been dismissed or put her child in danger. So her brain made the choice. If speaking was impossible, remembering became impossible too. The memory locked away not just from others, but from herself. Her husband died 15 years ago. Never knowing. His brother died 10 years ago. The former deputy was now 83, in a care facility 2 towns over. Truth had waited 50 years. 3 weeks after confession, excavation began. The river had shifted slightly over 50 years, but geologists used old maps to determine where the bank would have been in 1974, exactly where she'd indicated. 4th day of digging, they found something. Human remains, preserved in oxygen-poor silt, male, age 40 to 50 at time of death. Evidence of blunt force trauma to skull. Matched missing man's description. Grandmother watched news coverage. When told they'd found remains, she simply nodded. "I know," she said. "I've always known. I just couldn't remember that I knew." The paradox of dissociative amnesia. Information remains somewhere in brain, influencing emotions, decisions, dreams, but inaccessible to conscious awareness. Perhaps her lifelong anxiety around rivers wasn't random. Perhaps her insistence on moving away from that town wasn't coincidence. Perhaps her decades of nightmares about drowning weren't symbolic. The body remembers what the mind forgets. The former deputy was brought in for questioning, at 83, also showing cognitive decline. But when detectives mentioned the victim's name, his reaction was telling. Immediate agitation, defensive anger, then relief. "Someone finally knows," he said. "I've been waiting for someone to figure it out." Guilt also lives in the amygdala. It also waits, patient and eternal, for acknowledgement. The former deputy's confession came in pieces. The victim had witnessed illegal activities, smuggling, small-time corruption that seemed insignificant now, but was worth killing for then. They'd confronted him that night. Things escalated. One brother struck him. They panicked, weighted the body, pushed it into river. Then they'd seen the light go on in upstairs window of nearby house. They watched it, frozen. Light stayed on for hours, but no one emerged. They convinced themselves no one had seen. No one would come forward. For 50 years, they'd been right. Legal proceedings would be complicated. The brother who struck the victim was deceased. Other brother also deceased. Former deputy, the only living participant, and at 83 with dementia, questions of competency would arise. Justice, in traditional sense, might be impossible, but something else achieved. The victim's family, who'd spent 50 years wondering, now had answers. The grandmother, who'd carried invisible weight, now understood why. Community's rumours could be replaced with truth. The case became landmark in forensic psychology. It demonstrated complex relationship between dementia and dissociative amnesia. Traumatic memories can remain inaccessible for decades, then suddenly resurface when disease dismantles brain's protective structures. Grandmother gave one final interview during moment of lucidity. "I don't know if I'll remember this tomorrow. Dementia takes everything eventually. But right now, I'm glad I finally told." Even 50 years late, truth matters. She doesn't speak anymore. The lucidity lasted only weeks before dementia's progression resumed. She no longer remembers the confession, investigation, discovery, returned to silent world. But something fundamental changed. Not in her mind, but in the world around her. A family has closure. Cold case solved. Truth buried has been brought to light. Even if she can't remember being catalyst, her breakthrough had ripples extending far beyond herself. The victim's daughter, now 60 herself, visited once, sat beside wheelchair for an hour, holding her hand. Grandmother gave no sign of recognition, but daughter said it didn't matter. "She gave my father back to me. Not his body, we'd buried his remains, but his story, his truth. Knowledge that his disappearance wasn't his choice, that he didn't abandon us. That's a gift beyond measure." Memory is mysterious. Trauma is complex. Brain's capacity for both protection and revelation is extraordinary. This story has no neat resolution, no complete justice, no perfect healing, but it has truth. After 50 years of silence, enforced first by fear, then by neurology, truth finally found its voice. Even in labyrinth of dementia, even in fortress of dissociation, truth waits. Patient, persistent, eternal, waiting for moment when walls crumble and silence breaks. The grandmother stares out window at falling snow. She doesn't remember river, night, confession. But sometimes, nurse reports, she smiles in her sleep now. Small, peaceful smile, as if some deep part of her knows that weight has been lifted. After 50 years of carrying secret she didn't know she held, she's finally, blessedly, free.